The United Arab Emirates United Arab Emirates, sometimes simply called the Emirates or the UAE, is a country located in the southeast end of the Arabian Peninsula on the Persian Gulf, bordering Oman to the east and Saudi Arabia to the south, as well as sharing sea borders with Qatar and Iran. In 2013, the UAE's total population was 9.2 million, of which 1.4 million are Emirati citizens and 7.8 million are expatriates. Established in December 1971, the country is a federation of 7 emirates. The constituent emirates are Abu Dhabi, Ajman, Dubai, Fujairah, Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, and Al Quwain. Each emirate is governed by an absolute monarch. Together, they jointly form the Federal Supreme Council. One of the monarchs is selected as the President of the United Arab Emirates. Islam is the official religion of the UAE, and Arabic is the official language, although English is widely used. The UAE's oil reserves are the 7th largest in the world, while its natural gas reserves are the world's 17th largest. The late Sheikh Zayed, ruler of Abu Dhabi and the first president of the UAE, oversaw the development of the Emirates and steered oil revenues into healthcare, education and infrastructure. The UAE's economy is the most diversified in the Gulf Cooperation Council, with its most populous city of Dubai emerging into a global city and international aviation hub. Nevertheless, the country remains extremely reliant on its export of petroleum and natural gas. The UAE has been criticized for its human rights record, including the role of Sharia law in its legal system. The UAE's rising international profile has led some analysts to identify it as a regional and middle power. History. Antiquity. The earliest known human habitation in the UAE dated from 5500 BC, but finds of flint tools could date the first human habitation of the UAE's western coast to 130,000 years ago. At this early stage, there is proof of interaction with the outside world, particularly with civilizations to the northwest in Mesopotamia. These contacts persisted and became wide-ranging, probably motivated by trade in copper from the Hijaz Mountains, which commenced around 3000 BCE. In 637, Julfair was used as a staging post for the Islamic invasion of Sasanian Iran. From the 2nd century AD, a movement of tribes along the northeast along the southern coast of Arabia took place, with groups of the Yazdite, Qartani and Qudara occupying the areas southwest of the Hijaz Mountains, while Sassanid groups dominated the eastern or Batana coast, with the Persian coast known as Al-Bahrain. The interior oasis town of Al-Ain was known as Tuam and became an important staging post of the trade routes to the interior from the east coast. The earliest Christian site in the UAE was first discovered in the 1990s. An extensive monastic complex on what is now known as Sabani Yas Island and which dates back to the 7th century. Thought to be Nestorian and built in 600 AD, the church appears to have been abandoned peacefully in 750 AD. It forms a rare physical link to a legacy of Christianity which is thought to have spread across the peninsula from 50 to 350 AD following trade routes. Certainly, by the 5th century, Oman had a bishop named John, the last bishop of Oman being Etienne, in 676 AD. Islam. The spread of Islam to the northeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula is thought to have followed directly from a letter sent by the Islamic prophet Muhammad to the rulers of Oman in 630 AD, 9 years after the Hijrah. This led to a group of rulers traveling to Medina, converting to Islam and subsequently driving a successful uprising against the unpopular Sassanids, who dominated the northern coasts at the time. Following the death of Prophet Muhammad, the new Islamic communities south of the Persian Gulf threatened to disintegrate, with insurrections against the Muslim leaders. The Caliph Abu Bakr sent an army from the capital Medina which completed its reconquest of the territory with the bloody Battle of Dibba, in which 10,000 lives are thought to have been lost. This assured the integrity of the caliphate and the unification of the Arabian Peninsula under the newly emerging Rashidun Caliphate. Ottoman and Portuguese era. The harsh desert environment led to the emergence of the versatile tribesmen, nomadic groups who subsisted due to a variety of economic activities, including animal husbandry, agriculture and hunting. The seasonal movements of these groups led not only to frequent clashes between groups but also to the establishment of seasonal and semi-seasonal settlements and centers. These formed tribal groupings whose names are still carried by modern Emirates, including the Bani Yas and Al-Bufala of Abu Dhabi, Al-Ain, Liwa and the Al-Bahrain coast, the Dawahir, Awamir and Manazir of the interior, the Sharqiyin of the east coast and the Khawazim to the north. By the 16th century, ports in the Gulf and part of the population of the region came under the direct influence of the Ottoman Empire. By the 17th century, the Bani Yas Confederation was the dominant force in most of the area now known as Abu Dhabi. The Portuguese maintained an influence over the coastal settlements, building forts in the wake of the bloody 16th century conquest of coastal communities by Albuquerque and the Portuguese commanders who followed him, particularly on the east coast at Muscat, Sohar and Corfacan. The southern coast of the Persian Gulf was known to the British as the Pirate Coast, as boats of the Al-Khawazim Federation based in the area harassed British-flagged shipping from the 17th century into the 19th. British expeditions to protect the Indian trade from raiders at Ras Al Khaimah led to campaigns against that headquarters and other harbours along the coast in 1809 and subsequently 1819. The following year, Britain and a number of local rulers signed a treaty to combat piracy along the Persian Gulf coast, giving rise to the term trucial states, which came to define the status of the coastal Emirates. Further treaties were signed in 1843 and 1853, primarily in reaction to the ambitions of other European countries, namely France and Russia. The British and the trucial sheikdoms established closer bonds in an 1892 treaty, similar to treaties entered into by the British with other Persian Gulf principalities. The sheikhs agreed not to dispose of any territory except to the British and not to enter into relationships with any foreign government other than the British without its consent. In return, the British promised to protect the Trucial coast from all aggression by sea and to help in case of land attack. This treaty, the exclusive agreement, was signed by the rulers of Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Ajman, Ras Al Khaimah and Al Quwain between 6 and 8 March 1892. It was subsequently ratified by the Viceroy of India and the British government in London. British maritime policing meant that pearling fleets could operate in relative security. However, the British prohibition of the slave trade meant an important source of income was lost to some sheikhs and merchants. The charge of piracy is disputed by modern Emirati historians, including the current ruler of Sharjah in his 1986 book, The Myth of Arab Piracy in the Gulf. British era, discovery of oil during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the pearling industry thrived, providing both income and employment to the people of the Persian Gulf. The First World War had a severe impact on the industry, but it was the economic depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s, coupled with the invention of the cultured pearl, that wiped out the trade. The remnants of the trade eventually faded away shortly after the Second World War, when the newly independent government of India imposed heavy taxation on pearls imported from the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. The decline of pearling resulted in extreme economic hardship in the Trucial states. The British set up a development office that helped in some small developments in the Emirates. The 7 sheikhs of the Emirates then decided to form a council to coordinate matters between them and took over the development office. In 1952, they formed the Trucial States Council, and appointed Adi Bittar, Dubai's Sheikh Rashid's legal advisor, as Secretary-General and legal advisor to the council. The council was terminated once the United Arab Emirates was formed. The tribal nature of society and the lack of definition of borders between emirates frequently led to disputes, settled either through mediation or, more rarely, force. The Trucial Oman Scouts was a small military force used by the British to keep the peace. In 1955, the United Kingdom sided with Abu Dhabi in the latter's dispute with Oman over the Buraymi Oasis, another territory to the south. A 1974 agreement between Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia would have settled the Abu Dhabi-Saudi border dispute, but this has not been ratified. The UAE's border with Oman was ratified in 2008. In 1922, the British government secured undertakings from the Trucial rulers not to sign concessions with foreign companies. Aware of the potential for the development of natural resources such as oil, following finds in Persia and Mesopotamia, a British-led oil company, the Iraq Petroleum Company, showed an interest in the region. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company had a 23.75% share in IPC. From 1935, onshore concessions to explore for oil were agreed with local rulers, with APOC signing the first one on behalf of Petroleum Concessions Limited, an associate company of IPC. APOC was prevented from developing the region alone because of the restrictions of the Red Line Agreement, which required it to operate through IPC. A number of options between PCL and the Trucial rulers were signed, providing useful revenue for communities experiencing poverty following the collapse of the pearl trade. However, the wealth of oil which the rulers could see from the revenues accruing to surrounding countries such as Iran, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar and Saudi Arabia remained elusive. The first boreholes in Abu Dhabi were drilled by IPC's operating company, Petroleum Development Limited at Ras Sada in 1950. With a 13,000 feet deep borehole taking a year to drill and turning out dry, at the tremendous cost at the time of £1 million. In 1953, a subsidiary of BP, Darcy Exploration Limited, obtained an offshore concession from the ruler of Abu Dhabi. BP joined with Compagnie Française des Pétroles to form operating companies, Abu Dhabi Marine Areas Limited and Dubai Marine Areas Limited. A number of undersea oil surveys were carried out, including one led by the famous marine explorer, Jacques Cousteau. In 1958, a floating platform rig was towed from Hamburg, Germany, and positioned over the Schiff Pearl Bed, in Abu Dhabi waters, where drilling began. In March, it struck oil in the Upper Tamuma, a rock formation that would provide many valuable oil finds. This was the first commercial discovery of the Trucial Coast, leading to the first exports of oil in 1962. ADMA made further offshore discoveries at Zakum and elsewhere, and other companies made commercial finds such as the Fatah oil field off Dubai, and the Mubarak field off Sharjah. PDTC had continued its onshore exploration activities, drilling 5 more boreholes that were also dry, but on the 27th of October 1960, the company discovered oil in commercial quantities at the Murban No. 3 well on the coast near Tara. In 1962, PDTC became the Abu Dhabi Petroleum Company. As oil revenues increased, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, undertook a massive construction program, building schools, housing, hospitals and roads. When Dubai's oil exports commenced in 1969, Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, the ruler of Dubai, was able to invest the revenues from the limited reserves found to spark the diversification drive that would create the modern global city of Dubai. Independence by 1966. It had become clear the British government could no longer afford to administer and protect what is now the United Arab Emirates. British MPs debated the preparedness of the Royal Navy to defend the Trucial Sheikdoms. Secretary of State for Defence Denis Healey reported that the British armed forces were seriously overstretched and in some respects dangerously under-equipped to defend the Trucial Sheikdoms. On 24 January 1968, British Prime Minister Harold Wilson announced the government's decision, reaffirmed in March 1971 by Prime Minister Edward Heath, to end the treaty relationships with the 7 trucial sheikdoms that had been, together with Bahrain and Qatar, under British protection. Days after the announcement, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, fearing vulnerability, tried to persuade the British to honour the protection treaties by offering to pay the full cost of keeping the British armed forces in the Emirates. The British Labour government rejected the offer. After Labour MP Goran W. Roberts informed Sheikh Zayed of the news of British withdrawal, the 9 Persian Gulf sheikdoms attempted to form a Union of Arab Emirates, but by mid-1971 they were still unable to agree on terms of union, even though the British treaty relationship was to expire in December of that year. Fears of vulnerability were realised the day before independence. An Iranian destroyer group broke formation from an exercise in the lower Gulf, sailing to the Tunb Islands. The islands were taken by force, civilians and Arab defenders alike allowed to flee. A British warship stood idle during the course of the invasion. A destroyer group approached the island Abu Musa as well, but there, Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed al-Kashimi saw the writing on the wall. The island was quickly leased to Iran for $3 million a year. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia laid claim to swathes of Abu Dhabi. Bahrain became independent in August, and Qatar in September 1971. When the British Trucial Sheikdoms Treaty expired on 1 December 1971, they became fully independent. The rulers of Abu Dhabi and Dubai decided to form a union between their 2 emirates independently, prepare a constitution, then call the rulers of the other 5 emirates to a meeting and offer them the opportunity to join. It was also agreed between the 2 that the constitution be written by 2 December 1971. On that date, at the Dubai Guesthouse Palace, 4 other emirates agreed to enter into a union called the United Arab Emirates. Bahrain and Qatar declined their invitations to join the union. Ras Al Khaimah joined later, in early 1972. In February 1972, the Federal National Council was created. It was a 40-member consultative body appointed by the 7 rulers. The UAE joined the Arab League in 1971. It was a founding member of the Gulf Cooperation Council in May 1981, with Abu Dhabi hosting the first summit. UAE forces joined the Allies against Iraq after the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. After independence, the UAE supported military operations from the US and other coalition nations that are engaged in the war against the Taliban in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, as well as operations supporting the global war on terror for the Horn of Africa at Al Dhafra Air Base, located outside of Abu Dhabi. The airbase also supported Allied operations during the 1991 Persian Gulf War and Operation Northern Watch. The country had already signed a military defense agreement with the US in 1994 and one with France in 1995. In January 2008, France and the UAE signed a deal allowing France to set up a permanent military base in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. The UAE joined international military operations in Libya in March 2011. On 2 November 2004, the UAE's first president, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, died. His eldest son, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, succeeded as Emir of Abu Dhabi. In accordance with the constitution, the UAE's Supreme Council of Rulers elected Khalifa as president. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan succeeded Khalifa as Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. In January 2006, Sheikh Maktoum bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai, died, and the Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum assumed both roles. The first ever national elections were held in the UAE on 16 December 2006. A small number of hand-picked voters chose half of the members of the Federal National Council, which is an advisory body. UAE has largely escaped the Arab Spring, which other countries have had. However, more than 100 Emirati activists were jailed and tortured because they sought reforms. Furthermore, some people have had their nationality revoked. A member of the ruling family in Ras Al Khaimah was put under house arrest in April 2012 after calling for political openness, mindful of the protests in nearby Bahrain. In November 2012, the UAE outlawed online mockery of its own government or attempts to organize public protests through social media.